Today, we are talking to Kim McKay from the Australian Museum about our Women's History campaign, Women Empowerment, Diversity and Climate Action with the Australian Museum.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kim McKay. I'm the Director and CEO of the Australian Museum. It is the nation's first museum. We're now 190 plus years old, which is incredible because if you think about when Australia had white settlement from 1788 to the present day, our museum is one of the oldest in the world. In fact, it's the fifth oldest natural history museum in the world. We have a collection that is completely extraordinary. It is both a cultural collection from Australia's First Nations people and First Nations people from across the Pacific, as well as quite an eclectic world collection too. And then a collection of our natural fauna, the animals of Australia and the fish and the birds, which is second to none. It's got over 21.9 million objects and specimens in that collection. So it's the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. And so we are both a natural science and culture museum and a research institute where we research the collections, and we have over 100 scientists working for us full time. So we have around 300 people at the museum, all incredibly experienced, and I have the great honor of leading that team. And we've just set up a whole new direction for the future, which embraces climate change, First Nations agencies, so our Indigenous people of Australia have a much greater voice in the museum, which is incredibly important. We're a colonial institution, which did a lot of wrongs, and as part of our own reconciliation, at the new entrance to the museum, we've just rebuilt a big part of the museum. We talk about the wrongs done to the past to our First Nations people. So we're really on a new quest, I think, to not just highlight the critical instances of the fauna. Australia has a terrible biodiversity record for our mammals, the worst biodiversity record in the world for extinction. And of course, climate change plays such an impact on our vast country. You would have all heard about in recent years the horrific bushfires we've had here, the floods we've had. It really is akin to a very famous Australian poem by Dorothea McKellar that said, "I love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains, of rugged mountain ranges and droughts and flooding rains." And that's exactly our nation and what we're dealing with. But at the same time, we're dealing with a lot of social issues with the place and recognition of First Nations people. We're one of the only Commonwealth countries that does not have a treaty with its First Nations people. So we have a lot of work to do in that regard, and we have a lot of work to do around climate change and protection of our environment further. We're fortunate to live in a beautiful country, and I see the museum as playing a really critical role in all of this. The museum is a trusted place. Museums around the world are actually, they're usually the most trusted institutions in any society. And this is an extraordinarily important role that we can play in communicating information that will help influence the society in which we live and improve it. My goal with the Australian Museum in the future is that we should play an integral role in stimulating debate and conversation about the issues of our times. And I think we're starting to do that.
So Kim, we've highlighted what we've done this month for Women's History Month. Could you tell us something of your favorite elements of our campaign?
Sure. Well, firstly, I think the celebration in Women's History Month of women in arts and culture is just a fantastic thing. There is no doubt around the world that women's voices and roles in art and culture are often diminished. I see that in my own country in Australia, where historically the history books were written to highlight men and their role in shaping modern Australia. But in fact, every step of the way there has been women. I created a gallery, believe it or not, at the Australian Museum, our Treasures Gallery, where we have more women and more First Nations people highlighted for the roles they've played in shaping our nation than have been on any other list of 100 people. Normally it's a list of men. So we're very much committed to bringing out the stories and the contribution of women right across the arts. I think some of the things you've really done is tap into the zeitgeist. I mean, during the COVID period, of course, a lot of people have been working from home. So you've enabled people to take on board the email course, for example, delivered to people's inboxes. So it's very easy to participate no matter where they're located. So that I think is a really great initiative. And we're all working differently now, and we're all learning differently than ever before. So I think the easier access to this information for the broadest number of people possible is fantastic. So that really did strike me as something being incredible. Also, the images that you've highlighted, these color images, and also the people highlighted, the women artists highlighted through the app puzzle game is a great initiative. I mean, we all like playing with new apps and we all like puzzles. And I think as a learning mechanism, it's a great way to engage people, and also with a younger audience too. So these sorts of initiatives, I think, really make the whole program really sing in a different way and really connect with people in a contemporary way. And I think, you know, there's a lot of connection. We talk about STEM and STEAM, about the arts connected to science, and there is a direct connection there. There's a wonderful intersection between art and science, and I'm very interested in that intersection. And I think this project, by highlighting women artists and scientists and others, helps highlight that intersection as well. So the entire program, I mean, it has much more to it than the things I've just noted, but it really does focus on something incredibly important in our times right now. There is a lot of discussion globally about the role of women and the agency given to women, and also the agency given to women from diverse communities. And this program underscores that, I think, by highlighting the role women have played in history. Women, as I said, have been written out of history. I know here in Australia, they have been completely written out of our history. You would think women never were here in the way it's been described, or that indeed First Nations people were never here either. So I think the more focus that can be brought to bear so that people understand that in our particularly male-dominated world in which we still live, there's still a long way to go, but we can be inspired, I think, by these early trailblazers who are, despite their gender, were able to embark on careers as artists. The first female artists in New South Wales, where the Australian Museum is based, were two sisters, the Scott sisters, and they were illustrators of natural history of flora and fauna. And they were the first paid women artists in New South Wales back in the mid 1800s. So they were literally scientists. In fact, our scientists still use their beautiful illustrations to this day because they were so scientifically accurate. And the sisters' names were Harriet and Helena Scott. And their works are now included in the UNESCO register because they're so extraordinary. And Harriet Scott said, "How I wish sometimes my name was Harry, because I could have then gone to university." And of course, women were precluded attending Sydney University at the time. So it's a very important program that you have to highlight the role that women have played in our history, and for younger women especially to understand that these are centuries-long struggles by women.
I really like what you said about kind of connecting the arts and sciences, because I know about Scott's sister. I'm personally interested in this kind of botanical drawings, let's say. But our exhibition that we created about pioneers, so women in history, we feature Maria Sibylla Merian, who was a similar person, actually. She was also scientific illustrator and the first person to actually go and research insects and plants life in Latin America. And she had the very same story, that she was a single woman in traveling, which was totally unseen. And in a way, you don't need Indiana Jones, you don't need like the fake stories Dora, because these women were there. Only so little people know about that. So
that's right. And they experienced a lot of hardship doing that as well at the time. And in fact, it's very sad that both Harriet and Helena Scott, who tried to make a living out of their artwork, both ended their lives in abject poverty.
yeah, which is also like shows that there was so much resistance, and being a woman in those times was extremely difficult, and every step was very difficult and extreme in the world of man.
And yet it's not that long ago in the time frame of history, is it, that these women existed? And it's 150 years ago.
Yeah, for this one.
So we're talking about maybe 4 generations, 3 to 4 generations only, and the change that has occurred in that time. But boy, we still have a long way to go.
So you mentioned a bit about the collections featuring women. Are also the curators in your museum? Do you have like balance between men and women? Is it something that you focus on?
Well, it is something that we focus on at the museum. I am, in fact, the first woman to lead the Australian Museum in 190 odd years. Before then, it was totally male. Before then, the executive team of the museum was entirely male. Now it is 60% female, 40% male in our makeup of numbers. In our management team, again, it's 68% female. And that is quite a difference from many other cultural institutions and museums, which have traditionally always had men leading them. There seemed to be a thought at some point that only British men could lead museums here in Australia. And so I'm proud to have proved that wrong for the time being, at least anyway. So we have a very strong female voice within the museum, but also amongst our curators. And this is very important because when you look at who our audience is, it's primarily families, often led by women who bring the children into the museum. And also among adults, it's tourists, although through the COVID period, we're not getting any tourists at the moment, but we're seeing increased numbers of people now come into the museum. At the time I'm speaking now, of course, Australia is pretty much nearly COVID free at the moment, but that's because we've had very closed borders. So in Sydney, for example, we have no COVID outbreaks at the moment at all, and we're leading a pretty normal life, which is extraordinary. So the museum has reopened, and we've reopened free to allow complete access to everyone, no matter what socio-demographic group they come from. So I'm very proud to have been the director who abolished charges at the museum to allow it to be free, so access for all. But women are encouraged. I actually, when I joined the museum sector 7 years ago now, I was surprised at how few women in Australia ran museums. Of the 22 major museums in Australia and New Zealand at the time, only 2 were led by women. And I thought, what's wrong with this picture? So with another female museum director, we established a mentoring program for senior women in museums across the country. And so far we've had over 80 women go through that program, and reported over 70% of them have since been promoted. So it's been I've always been a great believer in mentoring and lifting women up. And to do it, you need to do it. One of the great things about being in charge of an institution is I get to make decisions. So I can make decisions that help advance women's careers. I can help make decisions that help advance First Nations people's careers as well. And these are really important things, because what I've discovered since being in this role is being the director or CEO gives you enormous power. And why not exercise that power to make effective change?
Do you have women who inspired you?
There are many women who I'm inspired by. When I was a little girl, my first true inspiration was Florence Nightingale, the British nurse. And I wanted to be a nurse at that time. I used to wrap my dolls and teddy bears up in bandages constantly. Because when I was very little, at about age 5, I read a book, a Ladybird book about Florence Nightingale. And what I loved about her was that she effected change against all the odds and against her own illness. She changed the way in which hospitals treated the wounded, you know, through in war. And she made such a difference to the survival of soldiers. It was extraordinary. And I always then at age 5 wanted to be the matron of a hospital. And of course, I've ended up as the matron of a museum, really, except all my candidates inside are dead and stuffed. So with our animals and our taxidermy. But look, it is, so I think as a little girl, the first person I remember inspiring me was definitely Florence Nightingale. After that time here in Australia, the woman who led the suffragette movement in Australia, most people don't know that Australia was the second country in the world after New Zealand to give women the vote. And a woman called Mary Lee led that suffragette movement, yet she's pretty much unknown in Australia. And yet we don't learn about her at school, and we should. She was an extraordinary woman based in South Australia in Adelaide. And she really advocated for women's rights, not just through suffrage, but also helping women who were left homeless when they were abandoned by their husband, who suffered, you know, as they got older and had nowhere to live. She set up homes for them. So somebody like Mary Lee, who against all the odds, again, really fought to give women their rights, is incredibly inspiring. And I've read, when you read her speeches today, they're as relevant today as they were at the turn of the century when suffrage was granted here. So that was pretty, she's one who stands out for me. And it would be trite to say it, but even my own mother, you know, I live a life that is about 100% different to that of my mother in one generation. My mother left school at age 14. She was a very bright woman, but she was determined that my sister and I had an education. So again, at age 5 or 6, if you'd asked me what I was going to be other than a matron, I would have said, well, I'm going to university. My mother understood that education was the game changer for women early on, and my father too. And so they really sacrificed everything to ensure that we got a very good education and that we were able to improve our lives through that. And you see it everywhere. Every time a woman is educated, the difference it can make in a community, in a society. And today we need that. We're having a very deep conversation in Australia at the moment about how we haven't come far enough and how women are being treated, even in our federal parliament. And it's somewhat shocking, really, when you realize the deep sexism that exists in our culture and why does it still exist in this way. So there's a lot of work to be done here, and a lot of work for young women to make sure that then they don't have to put up with the abuse, and it is abuse. It's the verbal abuse I'm mostly talking about in the workplace. From when I was very young, every single woman I know has stories about this. And let's hope that the dialogue that's happening now can help change that.